Imagine this. You walk into your local Apple store one morning, planning to upgrade your phone. You've been eyeing the iPhone 16 Pro Max 256GB, sleek design, powerhouse performance. You check the price tag and do a double take. $2,150. You blink. Maybe you misread it. You check online. Same price. You ask the store clerk, this can't be right, can it? But it is. This isn't a supply chain hiccup. It's not a glitch. It's not even Apple's doing. It's the ripple effect of a single policy, tariffs. And it's not just your phone. It's your groceries, your gadgets, your gas bill, everything. We're not talking hypotheticals here. This is already in motion. As of April 2nd, 2025, the United States is back in a full-blown trade war, not just with China, but with nearly every major trading partner. The kind of economic event that doesn't just shake Wall Street, but shows up in your everyday life, at the checkout counter, the gas pump, and your family budget. So what happened? How did we get here? And more importantly, where is this heading? Because this isn't the first time America's danced this dangerous tango with tariffs. But history has a funny way of repeating itself when we stop paying attention. In the next few minutes, we're going to trace the roots of this global showdown, from Xi Jinping's subtle warning 6 years ago to Trump's 125% tariff blitz. We'll walk through how this is impacting the trade balance, big corporations like Apple, small business owners, and people just like you. And along the way, we'll ask a deeper question. Is this economic pain part of a greater plan, or are we playing a high-stakes game with no winners? Stay with me. You're going to want to hear this. Let's rewind the clock for a moment. Not to 2025, not even to Trump's second campaign. Let's go back to 2018, the start of the first trade war between the US and China. A quieter time, at least on the surface, but the foundations of today's economic storm were already being laid. There's a moment from that year that still sticks with me. Chinese President Xi Jinping was sitting across from 20 of the world's top CEOs, mostly from America and Europe. And in a calm but pointed way, he said something that revealed a whole lot about how China views confrontation. In the West, he said, there's this idea that if someone slaps your left cheek, you turn the other. He paused. In our culture, he continued, we strike back. Now, whether or not you agree with that philosophy, it tells you everything about the tone China would adopt over the next several years. Quiet strength, long memory, no tolerance for being cornered. And on the other side, you had Donald Trump, who believed in doing the opposite. Maximum pressure, high drama, bold moves. When Trump returned to the White House in 2025, he didn't wait long to bring the hammer down. On April 2nd, he imposed a sweeping 34% tariff on all Chinese imports, calling it Liberation Day. And unlike in 2018, this time, he wasn't targeting China alone. The tariffs hit allies and adversaries alike. Canada, Mexico, Germany, Japan. Now here's the thing. A lot of people thought China might hold back. After all, the stakes were higher than ever. But within 48 hours, Beijing hit back. Hard. Matching Trump's tariffs dollar for dollar, then adding export controls on rare earth metals and targeting specific U.S. companies. It escalated fast. In less than a week, tariffs on both sides soared to 125%. And if you're wondering, have we seen this movie before? The answer is yes. Back in 1930, after the stock market crash, the U.S. passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, raising duties on over 20,000 imported goods. The idea was to protect American jobs. But what really happened? Other countries retaliated. U.S. exports collapsed. Global trade shrank. And what might have been a recession turned into the Great Depression. Sound familiar? What worries me isn't just the tariffs themselves. It's the sense that we're repeating history with our eyes wide open. And unlike 1930, we're now part of a global economy where supply chains span continents and time zones. Raising barriers now doesn't just hurt the other side, it comes back around fast. So if both leaders knew the risks, why did it come to this? That's what we're going to explore next. Because once you understand the structure of U.S.-China trade, and who benefits and who doesn't, the picture gets a lot clearer. Let's take a closer look. What's actually on the line in this trade war? Let's put the headlines aside for a moment and get into the numbers, because they tell a story that rarely makes the news. In 2024, the total trade volume in goods between the United States and China reached about $585 billion. But it wasn't an even split. China exported nearly $440 billion worth of goods to the U.S., while the U.S. only exported around $45 billion to China. That's a $295 billion trade deficit, and that number has been a thorn in the side of American policymakers for years. Now, I know trade deficit can sound abstract, but think of it like this. For every dollar China spends buying American goods, the U.S. spends over $3 buying Chinese goods. It's not just about money leaving the country, it's about how deeply American consumers and companies rely on Chinese manufacturing. And when we break it down by product type, the imbalance becomes even clearer. China's top 5 exports to the U.S. in 2024: smartphones, laptops, EV batteries, Wi-Fi, and telecom equipment. Together, those 5 categories make up over 20% of what China sells to the U.S., with smartphones alone accounting for 9%. On the flip side, America's top exports to China include soybeans, aircraft engines, semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and crude oil. And even combined, they barely match the scale of what the U.S. imports from China. Why does that matter? Because it highlights a fundamental difference in how the two economies are structured. China is still, at its core, the world's factory, producing finished consumer goods at incredible scale and speed. The U.S., on the other hand, leans more toward agriculture, energy, and high-tech components that are harder to scale quickly. So when tariffs are imposed, they don't hit both sides equally. A 125% tariff on Chinese smartphones doesn't just raise prices, it shocks an entire supply chain that feeds into American lifestyles. Most of us don't realize how many of our daily essentials pass through Chinese ports before landing on store shelves here. Personally, this is where the trade war hits home for me. I'm not just thinking about numbers on a spreadsheet. I'm thinking about families, small business owners, and retirees on fixed incomes who suddenly find everyday items priced out of reach. It's easy to talk about tough on China policies. It's much harder when you're the one paying $8 more for laundry detergent, $200 more for a laptop, or $1,000 more for a phone. But here's the twist. Even with all these tariffs, the trade deficit hasn't disappeared, because we're still buying, just at higher prices. So if tariffs aren't solving the problem, and they're making life more expensive, what's really the goal here? Next, we'll get even closer to the ground and look at who ends up carrying this financial burden. Starting with the biggest retailer in America, Walmart. So who actually pays for all these tariffs? Here's a hint. It's probably not China. Let's say you walk into a Walmart to buy a basic white t-shirt. Nothing fancy, just your everyday $10 shirt made in China. Now, with Trump's 125% tariff in place, that shirt doesn't magically get taxed after you buy it. The tax hits before it ever reaches the shelf, right when it crosses the U.S. border. Walmart, as the importer, now has to pay $12.50 in tariff fees on top of the original $10 cost. That means their real cost per shirt jumps to $22.50. And guess who gets to make up that difference? You do. Because Walmart's not going to swallow that cost. Not in this economy. And not when they're trying to keep shareholders happy and stores open in every small town from Ohio to Oregon. So the price of that $10 shirt suddenly becomes $24.99 or more. And it's not just shirts. It's socks, kitchenware, electronics, toys, shampoo, phones, you name it. Now multiply that effect across millions of products every single day, and you start to see how tariffs quietly act like a nationwide price hike. And this isn't just about big box stores. Small businesses, like your local cafe or neighborhood salon, are feeling it too. That cafe that orders mugs, napkins, coffee machines, or even simple decor from overseas, those costs have all gone up. That hair salon that stocks products like oils, sprays, and packaging that come from China or pass through Chinese suppliers? Same story. I was talking to a friend of mine in Maryland who owns a small spa. She told me her costs for imported massage oils and candles went up nearly 40% in the last few months. Not because the suppliers raised prices, but because of the new tariff structure. Her clients haven't changed. Her space hasn't changed. But suddenly she has to charge more or cut services to stay afloat. And the hardest part? Her customers, many of whom are already cutting back, don't want to hear that tariffs are to blame. To them, it just feels like life is getting more expensive, and no one's offering answers. That disconnect is real, and it's growing. Tariffs might seem like a distant political tool, but for millions of Americans, they're hitting home in very personal, very frustrating ways. And yet, not all companies are hurting. In fact, some of the biggest names in tech got a surprising break. Exemptions, loopholes, quiet carve-outs. So coming up next, let's talk about Apple and why iPhones didn't get the same price hike as your t-shirt. Here's the twist no one saw coming. While small businesses and everyday consumers are grappling with rising prices, one of the biggest companies in the world, Apple, somehow managed to dodge the worst of the tariff storm. Now let's be clear, Apple was directly in the line of fire. Roughly 90% of iPhones are assembled in China. That means under Trump's 125% tariff plan, each iPhone should have seen a massive price spike. And according to analysts at UBS, that price increase wasn't theoretical. If fully taxed, the iPhone 16 Pro Max with 256 gigabytes of storage would jump from $1,199 to over $2,150. That's a 79% increase, practically overnight. But here's what actually happened. Just days after announcing those steep tariffs, the administration quietly walked some of them back, exempting nearly 1/3 of all Chinese exports from the new rules. And guess what made the exemption list? Smartphones, laptops, semiconductors, display screens, data processors, memory chips. In short, all the essential parts of Apple's global supply chain. The only major Chinese export among Apple's top categories that wasn't exempt? Children's toys. So how did Apple get this pass? Well, officially, the administration claimed these exemptions were designed to give American companies time to relocate manufacturing back to the US. But let's be honest, that doesn't happen overnight. And in Apple's case, it's not happening at scale. Setting up domestic production for millions of units? That's a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar task. The truth is there was enormous pressure from the tech industry, from Wall Street, and yes, from voters who didn't want to pay $2,000 for a new iPhone. And I get it. I'm not here to say Apple did something wrong. I use an iPhone too. It's part of our lives. But when small business owners are absorbing rising costs, when salons and diners are barely hanging on, and then we learn that $1 trillion company got a carve-out, it's hard not to feel like the system's tilted. It's one of those moments where you realize not all tariffs are created equal, and not everyone plays by the same rules. And it raises a bigger question. If these tariffs were truly about bringing manufacturing home, then why were the biggest importers of foreign tech, the Apples, the Dells, the Qualcomms, let off the hook? And if the goal was to protect American workers, what happens to the ones in industries that didn't get an exemption? In the next section, we'll explore that deeper contradiction, because the idea behind these tariffs sounds simple. Protect American jobs. But the reality is much messier. Let's talk about that. Here's the million-dollar question. Do tariffs actually bring jobs back to America? Because that's the promise, right? Slap tariffs on imports, make foreign-made goods more expensive, and suddenly companies will come running home to build factories and hire American workers. It sounds like a straightforward win, but in real life, like so many things, it's a little more complicated. Let's start with Trump's stated goals. He wanted to punish countries for unfair trade, create incentives for companies to bring manufacturing back to the US, generate new jobs, and boost tax revenues through tariffs. But here's where the economic paradox kicks in. When you raise tariffs, you're also raising the cost of doing business for everyone. That doesn't just hit China, it hits American manufacturers too, especially those who rely on imported components to finish their products. Let's say a US company makes air conditioners. Maybe the shell is built in Texas, but the circuit boards come from China. Suddenly those boards cost 50% more. The company has two options: either raise the price of the air conditioner, making it less competitive, or eat the cost and cut into already thin profit margins. Neither of those choices screams job growth. In fact, a 2019 study from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York found that American consumers and companies bore nearly 100% of the cost of the Trump-era tariffs. And in many cases, job creation simply didn't happen. I spoke with a union rep from Michigan last year, someone who spent decades fighting for domestic manufacturing. He told me, "We don't just want slogans, we want stable ones. Real wages, a plan that lasts longer than one presidency." And I couldn't agree more. As someone who comes from a family that worked in auto plants and textile shops, I understand the desire to bring jobs home. It's a noble goal, but tariffs alone aren't a strategy. Or yes, I do. So they're a signal. They say, we want change, but without serious investment in infrastructure, workforce development, and competitive incentives, they often lead to higher prices rather than higher employment. It's like raising the drawbridge before you build the castle. We need more than trade barriers. We need a blueprint for the future. And while some industries have made small shifts toward reshoring, the pace has been slow and the results uneven. So if tariffs aren't delivering on jobs, how do we measure the real economic impact? That's exactly what we'll look at next. Through a surprising lens, beauty salons. Because believe it or not, when things start slowing down there, it's often a warning sign for the entire economy. Let's dig in. What if I told you that your local hair salon might know a recession is coming before Wall Street does? Sounds odd, right? But back in 2008, some of the earliest red flags didn't come from banks or housing reports. They came from empty chairs at nail salons and delayed haircuts. And today those same signs are flashing again. Let's talk about the beauty industry, not just because it's a multi-billion-dollar business, but because it's surprisingly sensitive to economic shifts. When people start spacing out their appointments, skipping that color touch-up, or holding off on manicures, it's not just about beauty, it's about budgeting. Stylists and salon owners have long noticed a pattern. When the economy tightens, clients stretch visits from every 4 weeks to every 6, then 8. In 2024, those delays are back. In fact, one stylist in Chicago recently shared that her regulars now book every 10-12 weeks. They still want to look good. They just can't justify the extra $80 right now. And it's not just frequency. Tipping is also down. A recent survey showed average tips at salons have dropped from 20% to around 15%. That may not sound huge, but if you're a stylist relying on tips to make rent, it adds up fast. We're also seeing another hidden indicator: rising consumer debt. Credit card balances in the US have hit all-time highs, especially among middle-income earners. People are still spending, but they're doing it on borrowed money and cutting back on non-essentials like salon visits. Here's the thing. We often talk about recessions in numbers, GDP, inflation, job reports. But real life doesn't wait for an official announcement. It shows up in small ways first. Fewer clients in chairs, fewer tips in the jar, fewer splurges on feel-good things. Personally, I think that's why watching the beauty industry is so revealing. It's intimate, it's personal. And when people start sacrificing self-care to pay off bills or buy groceries, that tells you something's shifting, something deeper than just market volatility. And maybe you've noticed it too. Maybe your go-to barber has more openings than usual. Maybe your favorite nail tech mentioned business slowing down. Those aren't isolated anecdotes. They're part of a bigger pattern, one we've seen before, and one that may be repeating now. So, how does this tie back to tariffs and trade wars? Well, when the economy gets squeezed, whether by inflation, job insecurity, or higher prices from tariffs, these little ripple effects tell the real story. And that brings us to the next big question. If tariffs are meant to protect the economy, why are small businesses and everyday consumers feeling the squeeze first? So let's take a breath and step back. What have we really learned from this trade war? First and foremost, tariffs are not free. It might sound like a clever strategy on paper. Make imports more expensive, encourage American production, create jobs. But in practice, it's American consumers who pay the price. At the checkout counter, at the gas pump, and even at the salon. That shiny iPhone you love, it's 79% more expensive. The t-shirt at Walmart, now a few bucks higher, and that's just the beginning. Behind every number is a story. Behind every product, a supply chain stretched across oceans. One that's now strained, uncertain, and in many cases broken. We've seen how small businesses, from coffee shops to hair salons, are absorbing the shock in real time. We've looked at how big corporations like Apple are maneuvering to avoid the worst, often leaving smaller players behind. And through it all, one question keeps coming up. Is the pain worth the policy? That's not a rhetorical question. It's one we all need to sit with. Because tariffs are a tool, not a magic fix. They can protect, they can pressure, but they can also backfire badly. As someone who's watched economic policy unfold from both sides, policy promise and lived impact, I've learned that bold moves come with real consequences. And sometimes those consequences are felt hardest by people who had the least say in the decision. So now I want to turn it over to you. You've seen the numbers, you've heard the stories, you've felt some of this in your own wallet. Should America keep walking this path? Should we double down? Or is it time to rethink what economic strength really looks like in a globalized world? Let's talk about it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Have you been personally affected by tariffs or price hikes? Do you think the trade war has helped or hurt your industry, your everyday life? And if you found this video insightful, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who cares about where the economy is heading. This conversation matters, not just in Washington, but around kitchen tables, barbershops, and small businesses across the country. Thanks for staying with us. And remember, behind every policy is a person, behind every price tag, someone's story.